So, okay, so it's a little after 1 and or 3. Sorry, we normally meet at 1. We're all here. John McLaughlin, Val Oliver, myself, John Hedden, our professional staff, and he'll be back in a moment. We have no minutes to review or approve. I don't think we need a formal agenda following. I know we can accept the agenda and waive formal following by unanimous consent. There being no objections, that's approved. Okay. So we were going to, just the unfinished business, which is, going to basically stay on our schedule until we resolve things.
Yep.
So it's a running list, is discussion of the Nantucket Advisory Board. And John gave an update on that last time. Val, do you want me to give you a quick update on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, because I missed that, right? I wasn't here.
So what we did is we met with them, we explained what the concerns are from the HDC's point of view.
Yeah.
And what we need from them.
Yeah.
So they're going to put together, they have their maps for consideration for both the historic district area, understanding that it's not actually perhaps going to be historic district in the strict legal sense. But for now we're using that as the term for discussion.
Yeah.
So we got the historic district map draft and we from the Nantucket Advisory Board, and we have their area map draft, which is a slight expansion of the existing area. Mm-hmm. They're going to go through each of the members of MAB, and highlight things based on Appendix G, which is the rules and regulations for the historic district, of things that they would like to see changed from the appendix, or things they would like to see added with respect to Nantucket.
Okay.
And I asked that Brad Fleming, who's their chair, as you know, please compile that so we can use it.
We should have given it, did you give him Terry's notes?
No, because I thought we would just do that
when we do
it.
Okay.
I have those in our folder.
Oh.
So anyways, we're waiting to hear back from them, and they anticipated it was going to be this week or next week.
What?
Mannequin Advisory Board, were they going to get back to us next week?
I think they said 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Right, so this will be our second week. We met with them Tuesday last, right?
Today's what, 17th?
Yeah, so next week.
What day do they meet?
Tuesdays.
Huh?
Tuesdays.
Tuesday, okay, that'll be the 22nd.
So I'll fire off an email to Brad as a reminder. I know he's got a lot going on. I appreciate the fact that he's carrying the torch. So that's the Nantucket update. Building with Nantucket in mind and related topics. I think 2 things. One is this concept of mini split. John, you got to start eating your veggies because you're forgetting that we did the mini split. We approved the mini split guidelines. It may be that a formal version wasn't sent out by email, so maybe that's why it's not on your radar. But we actually have a set of guidelines, and in summary, they are that if it's on the front of the building or the side of the building in the old historic district, it's probably not going to get approved, the conduit, even if it's covered, unless it's not visible. And never on the front, but on the sides, unless it's just not going to be visible for whatever factors exist. And then where it's not visible in the old historic district, then that's most likely the spot it will be in. And of course, we're encouraging people to install them through the sill so that there's no visibility whatsoever. Outside the old historic district, it's basically the same thing. If it's going to be visible, it shouldn't be it's not going to be approved on the front of the building, and it shouldn't be visible on the side. There are some areas on the side where it would be limited visibility, and in a encased cedar box might be approvable. So those are, in a real tiny nutshell, that was what the HDC approved as the guidelines for the conduit lines, and then the guidelines and rules really for the AC compressors are the same as they've always been. Not in the front of the house, not on the side where they're visible, and if they are on the side in a location that the HDC determines acceptable, then it has to be in a lattice or behind a fence.
What day did we vote that?
That was voted in, I believe, don't quote me on the date, but somewhere around February 27th.
February.
Final copy February, and then voted, I think, in March. And John, as you asked before the meeting, John Haddon will send you a copy. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
First meeting we had,
do you have the minutes?
the minutes would be right here. Our first meeting was,
It was March and April. Did I say something else?
No, it wasn't the work group.
No, John, it wasn't our work group. We did this before the work group started.
okay, all right.
And Val and I made a presentation to the
Builders
Nantucket Builders
Asso-
Association.
I got the minutes.
So it's in there.
April?
Late March or April. But may I have your permission to move on to other topics on our group? Okay. So
Let's go, both my hearing aids quit. I'm an old one.
I know someone called me up and said, "Why are you yelling at John McLaughlin?" And I said, "I'm not. He can't hear me. His batteries are dead on his hearing aids." Okay. So John, while you look that up, we're going to talk about.
Go ahead, I can do it.
Okay. So the questionnaire, we're waiting on input from 2 members still from the.
Okay, February.
No. We have your and John's
Okay.
as the kind of discussion points.
Okay.
So we don't need to submit a written.
Okay.
It's already on the record from our meetings. We don't need to submit a written.
Okay.
So we're waiting for 2 members, and I'll bring that up at the next meeting. So then the next topic is, now that we've crossed the questionnaire off our list for today, at least, unfortunately, building with Nantucket in mind, and the fences. So last week, I'm going to update Val, you guys, real quick. Last week we talked about fences and the idea that in the broader scope being looking at Appendix G.
Yeah.
The broader scope being we want to get a couple of things done because we're
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yep.
So we decided that roof and roof shingle colors for the old historic district are underway. We're getting sample boards. It's been finding sample boards of a significant enough size for them to actually be meaningful for the commissioners to review and make decisions on has been difficult. But that's been resolved, subject to scheduling another, with the HDC, the full commission. So roof, shingle colors in the old historic district and districts and the other areas are addressed partially and on the agenda to address. The next thing that seemed to be of great importance was the mini splits, which we just covered, which John wasn't aware of that there was a policy. That's off the list. The next thing is fences. It seems to be fences we spend an inordinate amount of time on. Makes it difficult for staff. It makes it difficult for applicants. It makes it difficult for us. And the idea being we get some of this stuff out of the way and we get it under our belt and we feel good about it. And it also gives us a chance to see how it works so that when we take a bigger bite on a bigger topic, a topic that might have some, then we got a little practice.
Gotcha.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're on fences. We were going to discuss them today. John H. volunteered to get some documentation on different fence heights and locations in town. And the concept with the fences is that, and I'll bring this up what I'd like to end up with today is a recommendation to the full HDC that we discussed that I can draft.
Okay.
Part of that will include the concept that one of the things that we do at the HDC is we misremember things. It's human nature. We think about the way we think about certain things the way we think they are, and sometimes they aren't. And we don't all have the reference points that someone like John or Diane have, the historical reference points. That's another topic. And we don't all have an idea of what actually happened with fences in the whaling period and thereafter up until the 1930s. We have an idea of what we think it was. So it's important policy. So that's part of what our recommendation needs to address. The other thing and again, this is just to update you before we discuss. The other thing we talked about last week is that, and it's as indicated in the guidebook, the idea of fencing is actually encouraged on the streetscape to provide uniformity and knit the large structures together along a streetscape. The other aspect of the fence along the street is intended to create a demarcation point from between the public area and the kind of semi-private that you can look in transitional area in the front yard. And then the other zone was considered the private area, where that area was typically more of a solid fence that was allowed. Now, in the guidebook, it indicates that a fence of no more than 4 feet will be allowed in the front of the building in the Old Historic District. Interestingly enough, I don't believe it states that it has to be picket. I'm not saying it should be picket. I'm not saying it shouldn't be.
No.
I'm just saying where we are.
Yep.
And then the rules indicate that really what a fence should be is appropriate to the type of architecture. So, for instance, a structure that would lend itself to having iron work would have an iron fence. Whereas a small
Like the
cottage...
3 bricks.
Exactly. Whereas a small cottage, up the street more, higher numbers on Main Street, would have a wooden fence of some sort. To scale. So that's kind of where we left it, other than one other thing, is we drew a little diagram to kind of indicate that was the thing. Why we drew the diagram is in the guidebook, and this actually lends itself to a recommendation that I think we're going to have overall. The guidebook does a really good job of... Big Q-tip here. The guidebook does a really good job of providing a narrative and context, but where we're finding different people have given input that where the difficulty is it's less user-friendly in that there are different discussion points about a fence in different sections. And in a narrative sense, it makes sense, because if you're talking about a fence in the Old Historic District, that's where you want to have that information.
Right.
If you're doing a narrative, if you're giving context to the history and the fabric of the architecture. If you're doing it in the outlying areas, again, you'd put the fence there. Where it's problematic is that it's hard for people in today's day and age, where you pick up your phone and everything is available right there in front of you, to not have it on one sheet that says fences. Old Historic District, town, Sconset, Nantucket, outlying areas, in the future, multifamily, commercial, things along those lines, maybe subdivision. So one of the things is the recommendation would be, our recommendation may encompass that when the book is rewritten, that there would be 2 aspects to it. And one is the context, topics in context. And then the other is that it's by topic, so that you can open the book and see what you need to do.
So you can either look under the area you're in and, okay, yeah.
So that was just a general...
Little cross-reference.
Yeah. And then the last thing, I think I've said that before and I'll say it again, the last thing is, what got us talking about that is that as an applicant or a designer, there's nothing you can look at. There are different drawings and diagrams, which are very helpful. And I'm not slighting the guidebook in any way. It's just we're updating.
Yeah.
Times have changed a little bit. Maybe the content doesn't need to change, but the way that it's conveyed is, I think, the important part. One of the things is that there are various diagrams of site plans and illustrations that indicate where fence can go or what type of fence, but none of them are one site plan diagram for each of the different areas. Or, for instance, R5 and R10 zones, which are 5,000 square foot and 10,000 square foot lots, are very similar in density to what's in town. Actually, they're larger, but they're similar. So to my mind, the concept of a picket fence or some type of a fence in the front that defines the street and unifies the structures to create that kind of historical character, I think, there's various subdivisions close to town where you can see this very successfully. Woodbury is a great example of where it's successful, because it's not just one fence.
Well, I think Nashok is successful in that way, too.
Yeah.
Nashawquasit.
Yeah. So what we're looking at is, perhaps as a recommendation, what flowed from all that is a site plan example, kind of like we did with the mini splits. It may not be what makes it to the final book, but again, it's just something to get everyone going and get some discussion going and get it.
point of
But-
departure.
Yeah, and also get something on paper so people know what the heck they're able to do. So what we talked about was you have a typical structure. It would have a fence, as we typically do, that back to the plane of the structure should be no taller than 4 feet. Should be architecturally appropriate to the style of the home. That behind it, the private area can be a taller fence. We typically use the board and lattice that everyone refers to as a 5-in-1. Sometimes we use a 6-foot board. That fence would be able to be put back here. This is individual homes, not talking about subdivision context.
Yeah.
And this is typically in areas that, in my mind, go up to R10, so up to 10,000 square foot lots, and maybe not quite. Maybe if we had a 7.5, we'd be better off. But enclosing 10,000 square feet and back, 7,000 or 8,000 feet behind a house in a tall fence may or may not be what the commission wants to do. I think R10 is arguably the line where I personally, as a voting member, would say I wouldn't want to see big, tall fences on a 20,000 square foot lot, which is the next size up lot. So that's where I'm, just so you guys understand where I'm, in my own mind, drawing a line. What I'd like to do is get from you guys, how do we want to make a recommendation? Do we want to do it where we actually make a concrete recommendation that, based on the Appendix G, the rules, and then kind of flesh that out a little bit? Or do we want to make a recommendation that they all do what we're doing now and talk through, like, okay, let me back up. So one part of the recommendation could be we need to educate ourselves on what really happened with fences, not just what we think happened as a commission.
Well, I mean, I see this picture. We don't know what's the year.
Don't know the year on that one. That's
Yeah,
the
I
problem
mean,
with that one.
right. I can't see us going along with these type of fences right on the street.
That's a long
That's the
time
urbanization of
back.
Nantucket.
Right. And perhaps part of the recommendation is that if there's a difference between a 6-foot board fence enclosing your rear yard and a 6-foot board fence enclosing your rear yard. Say that 5 times fast. When a portion of that fence is on a street. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, let's talk about fences, but I want you to be thinking about it when we are, is how we're going to formulate a recommendation to them.
So I think it's like anything in the guidebook, it's a guide, because there is not every single situation is different. Every single law is different. So I think we make recommendations. Anything in front of the house, what's recommended is a shorter fence. In back of the house, you're allowed it a little bit taller, preferably not right on the property line. Things like the good citizen rule about the fence, the nice side is to your neighbor, or you do a two-sided, fence.
Question of the fence. Wouldn't it be a hell of a lot easier to make one regulation instead of this wants a 5-in-1, this one wants a 5, this one, say, look, on the two things that it authorized, they can't be seen from the front or the side, but can be used in the back of the house, from the front of the house backwards, say on the lot, facing the street. Right? Say, look, you can have 4-foot fence and a 5-foot fence, all right, from the house back. That's all you can have. You want to pick a fence in the front, that's fine. But from where the house is, off the lot, you can make the same size fence around here, down here, back here. But you say 5 or 6 foot is maximum for any fence. That's the end of the discussion. You haven't got to listen to this guy. Well, he's got one I want, and all this bull we have to take, Just all say, here's the guidelines right here. The guidelines have got to be dropped down quite a bit.
Yeah.
And what we're doing now is a personal taste of how to interpret the guidelines.
Yeah, but I see, John, where I disagree with you on that, very respectfully, is that's it's so black and white. So somebody's backyard could be 200 feet deep and 300 feet wide. And I don't feel comfortable saying you can enclose that with this type of fence. It's too much.
Okay, what do you have for a better idea other than having
I have an idea.
past policy?
I have an idea.
Yes.
May I? This is going to be like herding chickens. I mean, it's crazy, but it's just what it is. So that's the challenge we took on. I think it's important to try it. I would suggest that it's beneficial, and we're not voting on this, but it's beneficial to have hard and fast rules, and at the same time, we need to have the carve out for case by case. With respect to you gave an example, I think is an important one, is this length of unbroken fence. And I think our recommendation might include that you cannot have more than I don't know, 60 foot, 60 foot, 7
Unbroken.
sections. Yeah, 56 feet would be an 8 foot, would be 7 8-foot sections. So you can't have more than 56 feet of unbroken along any property line. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, maybe not, I'm just saying. Maybe it's separated, or maybe it's not separated, but it has to have a plant material on the outside. You decide at that point, you decide whether you want to have the fence right up against your property line with your neighbor and then break it so you can put in plant material, or you keep it in your property line so you can put some type of plant material. You know what I mean? So there may be a way to accomplish both goals where I just see that there's great utility for everyone to be able to say, without it being this homogeneous result, you can have 1 of 3 different types of fences in these areas in your backyard if there's no expanse longer than a certain amount unbroken. And it might be different for every zone.
Right.
So town, it might be 20 feet. I don't know. It might be, or 24 feet, which is 3 sections,
Because
8
the
foot
other
fence.
thing is when the larger the lots get, I hate to see people fence them in.
And I agree with that. I think what the guidebook indicates is in the outlying areas, they said closer, further away. In the outlying areas, fences is discouraged unless it's split rail and it conforms to. The other thing that was interesting is that it needs to conform to the topography
Right.
in the outlying areas. So it's not like you're just setting a fence level line to the horizon. You have to follow the topography so it undulates with the the moorland or wherever it is, the glacial valleys.
We should put that in what you just said possibly as a recommendation for a guideline. But it's on that tape, the only place it is. Right? Now I want to go back to what you said. Tuesday, February 20th, okay? February 20th, the only mention was discussion of mini split line sets and Builders Association meeting. Reviewed a draft on guidelines in regards to applications for an approval location for mini split conduits, right? Noted a draft was sent to the Nantucket Energy Office, okay? That was February 20th.
We're taking a brief sojourn.
Okay. Next one is May 8th. May 8th says, update from ACC Organization Focus Committee, no action at this time. So no, it has not.
Okay, so go to the meeting before the February one, because we voted on them before I presented them to.
Go to before February?
No. The meeting before the February one that you mentioned.
It wasn't the focus group thing, it was just Steve and I.
February, I got April 24th here.
Okay, well, you're looking, can we continue with fences?
All right, I don't want to get mixed up. This is April 26th, okay?
What do you think about the idea that there be some rigidity so that, okay, I get what you're saying, but my concern is that if we make a recommendation that it be open-ended, it kind of undermines the whole purpose of doing this, which is for all these things, if they're open-ended, one of the goals in doing this process and accomplishing this process is consistency. And part of the consistency when new members come and members go and personalities, not really personalities, but subjectivity on aesthetics come into play.
Because aesthetics, I don't think, are rigid.
I agree.
And I think that's what keeps it more, the whole process more organic, because there is different opinions, and I think guidelines are fine. I think rules are difficult when it comes to architecture and aesthetics.
Yeah.
That means you're saying one thing is right and one thing isn't right.
Which,
So we have guidelines that recommend X, Y, and Z. Are you saying so that it can get processed in the office?
no.
What you-
Yes and no. I think, okay, so I agree with you. Okay, this is where I'm having difficulty, and the feedback I get from people is that it's hard to know what the consistency is on what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. And I think part of that is the guidelines. And I think part of that is that we're using guidelines without enough rigidity. I'm not suggesting we take the organic nature of processing the applications out of the hearings, but I do think that you should, as a member, I believe, not with every topic, but with at least some things, like fencing, to some extent, you should be able to point at the guidebook and say, I'm sorry, but that is inappropriate, and that is not how it's laid out in the guidebook. Because sometimes things are approved that the guidebook wouldn't allow. And I think that's...
Because it can't be seen.
No, I'm not talking about can't be seen.
Oh.
With everything I'm saying, I'm referring to only things that are visible. There have been examples of fences that have been approved. And I'm not saying this board. I'm saying over the years, historically, because we're looking at this is like an institution out to 2050. Historically, there have been approvals for materials, more style, fences that would not be approved if you were just going by the guidebook. And I think that it's difficult for a member to be able to say, because the guidebook is so, there is a lack of rigidity in certain areas, on certain topics. It's very difficult. I mean, John does it a lot, and I know we kind of needle him for it, but there's nothing, it's very difficult to be able to say, hold on guys, I appreciate everyone's aesthetic. I think it would be wonderful to have that in an ideal world where we didn't have the Nantucket Historic District and we weren't protecting the historic fabric downtown. But this is inappropriate. It says right here in the guidebook that this is inappropriate. And there are times I think that could have been exercised, and I think it would benefit us to maintaining and saving the historic district over the next 30 years to be able to have that. I'm not saying the whole process with every topic needs to be locked in, and if it's this size of a square peg or this size of a round peg, it's good. If it's a little bit bigger than that, it's no good. If it's a little bit out of square, it's no good. I'm not suggesting we be rigid like that. I'm just suggesting that I think there's some topics that, for consistency, we need to be able to nail down. And then the other side of that is it makes it a lot easier for the applicants and the staff. Does that answer your... I mean, you may not agree, and that's okay too. I just, that's my personal feeling. And what we're trying to do is work out it's my feeling. That's my perspective based on what I've read and understand of the guidebook and the act and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to figure out is how we distill that into a recommendation that we can all get behind and then get voted. And the recommendation may be that we have someone come in, like a historian, I think we're gonna need the help of a historian in any event, which we've talked about briefly as a group earlier on, and I've been talking to John about more recently, and we'll update for the next meeting on that topic. Who can come in, or more than one historian, who can come in and give us some examples of where fences were used and how and when, and kind of maybe broaden our own perspectives not necessarily change them, but give us a different perspective to look at as a full commission? Or do we do that here and then make a recommendation? I mean, I don't know when the full commission is going to have time to do anything like that. We don't have time as it is now, which is part of why I'm trying to systematize some aspects of this to free up time to, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess.
What do you think? And then John.
I thought we were pretty consistent with fences, the types.
There was some fence approved down, I think, on Brant Point that's not on the point, but that's about 200 feet of fence, five and one. And it's,
February 27th, after the 20th meeting. All right, this is on the 28th. Meeting tomorrow with Energy Director with mini splits. The responsibility of the ACC to advocate responses to these matters added on the guidelines that only vertical oriented downspouts are approvable and more than one facade may be difficult to approve. My only question on those things, why don't we just say there's no house in Nantucket that can't be adapted to start either in the cellar or under the first floor, which is crawl space, to go in there and run it up the inside wall. That's their problem, not ours. Ours is the outside. We can do nothing to let people and force them to put it inside. It solves the problem. People come for that, the electricians. Well, you remember them, I didn't, I wasn't there.
okay, are you gonna, if we resolve this now, are you gonna let it go?
Sir?
So we can talk about fences?
I know, but I...
No, I want to answer your question.
Well, but-
My perspective on that is we're not in the business of telling people how they can or can't construct. I don't disagree with you. I installed these systems myself. I understand how they work. There's no reason, almost no reason whatsoever, that you can't put the line set inside the home. But that's not our, we can't approach things that way. The only way the HTC can approach things is it appropriate or is it inappropriate? I'm using the terms, sometimes we use like, sometimes we use dislike. As far as I'm concerned, it's meant to be the same thing. I do think it's more appropriate to say appropriate than inappropriate, because it gets us in the right mindset. It's less subjective, it's more about what the historical character is. But on the mini splits, what we decided, which you just read, was that what the commission voted was to accept the guidelines, and the guidelines address it in the way that the HDC can address it, which is it's inappropriate to have it on the front of the building, it's inappropriate to have it on the side of the building if it can be seen, and if it's in a limited visibility area, it is appropriate to have one down box encased in a one vertical line set encased in a vertical wrap. Not a go up and you have a dog leg and then you have another vertical and another dog leg, and you know, none of this mazes on the side of a building. That's the only way we can address those things, John. We can't tell people they can or can't run it in their house. We can just tell them that it's either appropriate on the outside or it's not. Does that satisfy your...
I'm not trying to be satisfied, I'm trying to think of equality. You can take a downspout. Right? Years ago they didn't wash them in, but they do now. It's okay, it's fine, wood. If they're going to run it up, it's still going to have a configuration. Remember I showed that picture with the S pipe up there. Nobody caught it, but I did. I saw it up there. It's not it's a fake S pipe. Double S pipe going down downspout. No?
That was yesterday's meeting.
Right, but it's not approvable under the guidelines.
Wait, there are no guidelines. I just read them all off to you.
John, did we or did we not
We
vote
had
guidelines?
3 pages of something stapled together with examples and information that we've handed out at a meeting.
I can email it to you, John.
John Ab?
Okay, all right, it saves time. I'm just saying,
Okay. John H?
Maybe it was a meeting he
Did
wasn't
we-
at.
February
We
20th.
voted, I'm pretty sure I made a point to ask that
Yes.
it be voted.
Check in March, John. I
Right?
think maybe sometime in March was
Was
There
it?
was an item and it was approved,
Okay. I mean, I know we voted on it.
as I recall.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
just all part of the process. I mean, and Val, if you will, that's why I want to kind of try and, I believe it's more important for us to pin down a good solid recommendation that's defendable, because when we go to an 8-member commission and we try to have these discussions, the same type of thing is going to happen to some extent in different ways with different members.
Well, so with regard to fences,
Thank you.
I can see having pictures or drawings of 5 kinds of fences.
So broaden our illustrations to encompass and include fences that are actually being used and have been approved historically.
Right, so like a 7-foot fence isn't approvable.
Visible.
Right.
Visible. We're all talking about visible stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not partially. I'm not defending, well, it's partially visible. I'm just saying in terms of if it's between 3 yards and it's all in the backyard of all 3 homes and you literally cannot see it, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about visible stuff, right?
Yeah, well, that's all we can talk
Okay,
about.
I just want to make sure we're... Okay, so got illustrations to include fence types approved.
Although you don't want to say that because then people will think, if you can't see it, we'll just put it up.
I know, we can't win if we try. I don't mean win like in a... You try and you try and you try, and then someone says, "Well, you didn't see it." But you know what? That's going to happen, and that's why the as-built That's why the as-built is a finable offense. So illustrations to include fence types approved, deemed appropriate, historic fabric. Okay, so we talked about that, and you think I don't remember how many exactly are in the book now. I think there's 2 fence types and 1 that's a railing type. And then there's, well, for instance, the board, what we call the 5 and 1 is not in the book.
No.
There's a 6-foot board.
Right. So that's what we're talking about, is
Right.
updating it to reflect
Right.
what we use.
Right.
Are you still on that?
Quick comment.
Can't let it go.
God, you're like a pit bull.
January 16th, discussion of HVAC
John,
mini split line.
John, I got to stop you right there. I got to stop you. It's in the minutes. John H. will provide it to you. We voted and approved the guidelines. No one's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. But I'd like to ask you to focus with us on the fences, because it's important for us to get...
I just gave the answer, the fences.
Okay, can you enlighten
No
me?
fence can go over 4 feet, and you can't go along, what is this?
Those are examples.
No fence over 4 feet. How does that work? You said 6 feet is okay in the backyard. You mean along the
That's
front?
thing. We're going to say, the first thing, is it visible? That's the most important thing from any.
Yeah, of
But
course.
you got to explain to the public as well as other commission members what is written in the guidebook. It says, if it's sight from a street, a traveled way, or a way approved by a subdivision control. Subdivision controls everybody putting in a driveway with houses on both sides.
I think it's safe to say we got that. We understand that. I think everyone gets
Are you
that.
speaking for yourself?
No, I'm speaking on behalf of the members at the
And why the
commission.
hell when it comes up to they say, well, it don't look that bad, let it go.
Because that's a different topic. You're talking about whether it's visible or not, and then the requirements of where, or where it can be deemed visible from. That's separate than when people say, I don't really care, I think it looks okay for that particular house. They're separate topics.
Here's
So-
a perfect example. 4-foot board fence and a 36 or 38 foot picket. All right? Now that board fence comes down to here. I don't know if it turns, no, it's open here, but anyway, John just brought it up. I agree, he's
Can I
right.
see him?
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay, you know what? Let's shift gears. John, let's look at your picture. No, I appreciate your trying to.
We have to go hard and fast. That's what I'm saying.
That's the problem. It's hard to do that.
John, can you move down here so we can look at these together? Come on, huddle up.
What do you want?
Come on down here, big guy. Get in close.
There's a couple of
No, forget about the mini splits.
Okay.
I'm gonna mini split you. I mean that in the most endearing way.
It's interesting.
I appreciate that you
Yeah,
did
so
this.
there's a couple of board fences I noticed on the front of the street. Some appear to be about 5 feet.
Oh, sorry.
Some appear to be about 5 feet tall, I would say. Maybe that's not 4. I have one more.
I like these, but we don't approve
John.
this anymore.
Yes, I'm
Sorry,
listening.
let me be on here. Can you come down here and look at these with us so we can have some discussion on the fences?
Yes, yes.
I know you want to talk about the mini splits, but. And Val, I don't disagree with you. It does look more urban, but I mean, I guess that's the thing I was trying to get to is that it didn't look the way it does now.
Yeah, look at with the guy.
Yeah,
They
this guy's
must be
sitting up there.
probably kids.
I think that one was
And I almost hate to bring, I haven't looked at these before today. I mean, I've looked at pictures on fences, but
kids. That's kind of the typical.
I think this
I like
would
that.
shake people up. If someone came in with this application on the street, that would be
That's on Orange Street.
shot down and
Isn't it?
you'd be tarred and feathered if you tried to get that approved.
In front of the triple house there, Orange Street. Yep.
What is the question here?
This is about focusing on
Types of fences.
types of fence and reality. The reality of the times, not what we believe was the case based on our own subjective opinions. This is based on real, live images, fact, history. So that we can make a recommendation about historical character based on the historical reference.
Okay. Go ahead, I'm listening.
So, for instance, this is on Orange Street proper, or is this
Yeah, it's 18 Orange. Like the church is right here,
right?
and this is that hut. It's like a triple.
Right. So this
Nitpick.
would be where relative to the street today.
It's across. You're standing at the property across the street and looking out. Orange Street is that on the other side of the fence.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's from
the entire
across the
property.
street.
So this is
yeah.
from across. Okay, because I'm
Yeah.
looking at that, trying to figure out where the heck is Orange Street.
Yeah.
So, John, this fence today, if someone came into HTC, would never get approved. We would say it's in the front of your house, even if it's the side yard.
Yeah.
It's in the front on the street.
You want to sit here and I'll stand there?
No,
I'll
right
stand.
here. No, that's what I want.
Okay.
Okay. This would never get approved, although it's historically correct.
Right?
So the point is, what is our recommendation going to be that reflects the historic character of Nantucket? Not just what it's been for the last 60 years, but what it used to be.
Okay. Now you take this here. That could have been there 90 years ago, or could have been there 6 years ago.
It's
I'm telling you, the way that
1920s,
young
the
lady is
picture.
dressed, that is not
Right.
It's
6 years ago.
1920s.
I'm just saying, I'm trying to see, it could be either time, period.
Well, this
Only
is
because of its
dated.
height and the way it looks.
This
the way
is
it's built.
dated 1920s.
Right?
Okay, so again, my point is, I think if we have a robust discussion, we can come up with better recommendations. So we need to be able to push back on each other and think about things with an open mind. And that's what I'm doing right now. That's my role, is saying, you said 4-foot fences, nothing else is allowed anywhere on the property. And what I'm saying to you is, this is a fence that is at least 4 feet tall on Orange Street. Built in it was built, I don't know when, but it existed in the 20s. So does a 4-foot fence, a maximum 4-foot fence, make sense?
You have the first guidebook I gave you, remember?
Yeah.
In it, it says, it's inappropriate to put a board fence on the street side. That's all it says. I got it
Okay.
here if you want to see it. But
But okay, and then this is proving that the guidebook is not infallible.
that's right. I just gonna
Okay,
say.
here is a picture. What's the date on this one?
Here.
41 Liberty Street.
Okay.
Board fence.
1890s.
1890s. Board fence at 41 Liberty Street on the street.
Right.
So
But the
the
guide-
guidebook in 68 didn't reflect what happened in the 1890s.
Okay. I refer back, it says guidebook.
Okay, here's another one.
Nobody's ever compiled all our regulations except in 2 pages.
Well,
that I
that's what
brought
we're
up.
that's what we're working on now. That's what we're working on now. 65 North Center Street. 4-foot board fence. I'm not suggesting everyone builds board fences. I'm just saying.
What street?
This is North Center Street.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
1890.
1890, 4-foot board fence right on the street, both sides of the house.
I don't deny they had them.
What
And
do
it also says to cover it that if you're going
What do
to
you mean
replace
you-
what was existing, it doesn't say what year. If it's pre-existing, then you can do it.
What I understand that, but I'm just saying, do you,
Yeah.
faced with the record,
North Center Street. Okay. All right, I got it.
faced with the
Rex
record,
Snyder's house.
faced with the record, how do we defend? Look, if I own this house, and I'm a smart attorney, I'm going to come in to the HDC with a whole bunch of pictures, just like these pictures and others. I'm sure there's tons of them, and say you're supposed to be protecting the historical character of the Nantucket. I want a 4-foot board fence because, look, this is the historical record: 1890, 1890,
Okay,
1890.
If we set a regulation top 4 feet anywhere, then the lawyer has to leave.
Right.
Okay?
I gotcha.
He doesn't go to hell. You know,
But
it's
I'm s-
already there.
But that's what I'm saying is
Yeah.
these are board fences.
I agree.
So are we? I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, are we making our recommendations today? Not us to the HDC, but is the HDC making its recommendations based? It seems to me like we're making policy based on what the general consensus is versus what happens.
But you're going to separate general consensus away from personal taste.
Well,
The interpretation of, not the guidebook, interpretation of what's best for Nantucket.
which is part of what this
Right.
is why I'm doing this exercise,
I
is to
agree.
kind of shake us up a little bit in terms of how we're thinking.
This has got a board fence here,
It may
5
be
foot,
too
one is 6
ambitious.
foot.
I mean, not for just
Okay,
our
he's
group.
That's
True.
right on Main Street, I think.
Yeah.
Where?
I think this is Main Street, let's see. Orange, Silver Street at Orange.
Well, that was
Wait a minute,
That was-
silver,
almost
silver and orange. Okay, this is,
yeah.
Oh,
that
Nat Philbrick's is,
Green Hill or whatever the hell it is. This was the Captain Jack McDonald's house.
gotcha.
And the what the hell is the other Portuguese family there? Anyway, but this is next to this house is the Jews. What does it? Weaving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Benda.
Here,
At 1880, 1880.
John. Here's a fence. These boys are sitting on it.
Right.
Looks like it's the 1870s, and that's got to be the better part of a 6-foot fence in the front yard
Yeah.
on the street.
Well, I wouldn't say that that's 6 foot, but okay.
Look at 4 chimneys too.
It's pretty
That's
close.
the other house next to it.
Here's the window height behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's probably 4. I'd say that's probably close to 5 or 6 feet. They're up there on a perch.
That's a half sash. It was. It's not now.
What street address is this? Yeah, exactly. Smart Alec.
It doesn't say. 1870.
As you said about a couple months ago, John, you're too old and you've been here too long. You're right.
You are the one who says that. I'm the one who just nods my head because I can't get it out of your head.
But anyway,
So
yeah,
here's-
I agree. There's tons of them.
Okay, and then this is a great example of where this is a 4-board horizontal rail fence that would never be approved today. This is the 1870s in Sconset. There's one there.
Now, do you know? all
Here's,
right.
here, hold on a second.
Broadway.
Hey.
Here's another one
Right.
in Sconset.
But you know what that is? In historic terminology?
1880s.
1880,
Front Street.
1700s too. This type of slat fence is a horse fence. That's what it is.
Well, that's not a
Paddock
barn.
fence.
That's someone's house.
Oh, no problem. I'm saying, but it's usually for
These are
horses.
these are little cottages that have these fences in front of them.
You get enough upstate New York, there's millions of these.
Yeah.
But that's because of the horse, you know?
Yeah. Well, in
Yeah.
Sconset, they weren't keeping horses in these little cottage yards. And then here's one,
They were
which is a
probably cheaper to
three-slab.
build.
Here you found an oddity.
Well, there's
an
three of
odd-
There's
them.
3 of them. What are you talking about?
Where are they?
Broadway,
One, yeah, Front and Broadway, and then this is.
North Bluff, Bank Street.
Fine. I have no problem with that. I
I,
agree, that fence was there. In 1890, I agree.
so you don't think it should? Do you believe it should inform our opinion on what's allowed, or do you believe it shouldn't inform our opinion?
We've always used the height of a fence as a state law. State law says that no fence can be over 6 foot high and block a man's garden on the other side of it where the sun is all day long. That's a state law.
Kind of.
I brought it in here years ago, but anyway.
It's kind of.
Oh, okay, fine. All right, if we're going to say, all right, the only thing you can have in the old, now we're in the old historic districts, we're not out of town photos, we're mostly in the old historic districts here in Wisconsin, right? Okay. What would be the maximum fence allowable if they are all the same? That's like there is downtown. Downtown, we say the majority which is picket. Picket fence.
4 feet.
With or without a cap? or
Maximum
pointed?
4 feet in the front.
What?
I believe it should be maximum 4 feet in the front. That's what the historical record shows us. This is a 4-foot fence. This is well over 4 feet. It's closer to 6. This is 4 feet. This is about 4, even though it's not. There's a different type of fence, but it's 4 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet, at least 4 feet, if not 6. 4
Here in
feet.
the back?
That looks like a 3-foot fence.
Where are you going to put the fences?
I'm not gonna get it-
You just said it right. Where are you going to put it?
Wait a minute. Let's not mix our questions. 4 foot, 4 foot, 4 foot. I don't see a 3-foot fence except for perhaps this 3-rail in Sconset, and on the back side of this image,
Here, right
Right.
past the church,
Roughly.
and here one next to a 4-foot. So, for me, the answer would be: you asked the question, "What's the tallest fence
Maximum.
on the front?" And I would say a 4-foot fence. Oh, and here,
there. There's something wrong with you if you don't know the difference.
and
And
here's a
that's a-
4.5 to 5-foot picket fence.
Well, that guy's going to be a midget then.
They all were in them days.
It's like a 6 foot. Peter Russell House on Spring Street.
She said this is a 4 foot and this is a 5 foot.
Are you gonna? No,
If
no,
you
I
don't
didn't.
know
I
the
said this.
difference-
I said this is a 4,
Yeah.
and this is probably that's clearly lower, but I don't know what it is.
All right. You don't know the difference between 4
And
inches and
what-
8 inches.
Okay, let me ask you this: as a picket fence, the Historical Association lists this as 1890s Peter Russell House, 3 Spring Street, formerly Fish Lane. How tall would you say that fence is, John? Picket fence, front of the house on the street.
I said it's 5 foot,
Okay,
maybe 5 foot and a half, and that's the top.
all right. So
Right.
clearly, that's the exception to the rule, and if the rules are written the way, or the guide or the rules are written the way that they have been, there's room for exceptions. But from what I'm seeing, a 4-foot fence is allowed in the front of a building in the old historic district. At least insofar as the late 1880s up through the early 1930s. Do you think so or no?
Yeah, I think it's a good guide. I don't think there can be hard and fast rules.
No, I gotcha. Maybe the rule is just that it has
Because
to be
this,
appropriate to
I
the
think,
house.
is appropriate to
The
the
style,
house.
the architecture.
Yeah.
So maybe it's no taller than 4 feet in the front. We're talking about densely populated areas, so
Mm-hmm.
the old historic district, Sconset.
Board fence, nothing else, no pickets, nothing.
No, I'm not talking about the type of fence yet. I'm just talking about I'm just talking about the height based on what we saw here. I'm trying to keep it simple because this is going to get really complicated really easily.
Yeah.
And we're talking about fences. So 4 feet in the front, in densely populated areas, which we would consider up to, for the purposes and convenience of using zoning as a descriptive, R10, which is a 10,000, which is our neighborhood.
Yeah.
When we started this, we brought up the fact of if we had a half an acre, or a full acre, or a quarter of an acre, we have no jurisdiction over the size of the lot, no matter what. Which is a lot that's 3,000 square feet, which is grandfathered. We have nothing to do to bring up the word zoning or acreage.
No, I disagree with you completely, respectfully, but completely. We have the ability, when I say we, I'm saying the HDC, I believe has the ability, under law, very clearly stated, to set up its own rules and regulations and guidelines, subject to being in conformance with the purpose of the Act. And the purpose of the Act is to protect the historic character and fabric of the island for economic purposes. A lot of people forget about that, but be that as it may, the HDC can use anything it wants to define an area, whether it's a zoning map, whether it's a... Pardon me?
Yeah. It says nothing about a zoning is your square footage of a lot.
John, the HDC can define areas. What's the difference? I don't want to get bogged down.
You're right.
No, I don't want to get bogged down in this, in the sense that, what's the difference between saying the glacial valley, which we do in the guidebook, and a different definition that describes an area of the island? There's no difference other than how you define it.
Right.
So the glacial valley defines a certain, it's got topography and geological characteristics.
Right, the shape of the land.
Right. Well, that's one category of a definition. There's nothing that says anywhere that I'm aware of that we can't use a different category of definition, which is density. And in fact, that's what we use when we define the old historic district. In a way, they used how densely together the properties are. And in the guidebook, it even talks about more densely populated areas. The fence, the purpose of the fence along the street is to encourage uniformity and connect the structures and create a sense of character on a human scale, because it's bringing these big structures down, stepping them down and transitioning from the private space to the public space. So are you okay with that or no?
You make some points.
Okay, I'm not trying to shut you down. I just trying to articulate my understanding of it.
I'm coming from, and we'll say, people on the commission right now, I'm coming from an older mind.
Okay.
Mindset. Put it that way.
Not much older.
That's what I'm coming from what I've done for years, and there's been very little change between the first guidebook in 1967 and the last one.
Okay, I respect that.
It needs changing, but right now we're getting filled in with 5-1s. We're getting filled in. Everybody wants something, a little bit different. They want that different case they got. Well, he's got one, I want one. Or I got one and I don't want him. It's like a boat. You buy a 16
here's
boat.
our...
Okay, so can we? So
Yeah.
we're talking about the front. We're talking about. We got an hour.
I'm going to quarter off.
Okay, so we got 45. We got 42 minutes. I kind of would like to get an idea from you guys. I'm going to try and structure this a little bit if it's okay. So we talked about the front 4 feet, densely populated. My understanding of the history and everything else is that outside of the town, it would also be a 4-foot max fence. There's nothing to indicate.
Right.
And John, please, if you've seen anything or you in the files, please chime in. There's nothing to indicate that outside of town that a taller fence would be allowed on the front of the property. If anything, it would.
I think it's incongruent with
Right.
the area.
So 4 foot would be. 4 foot would be the max in the old historic district, the Wisconsin Historic
The
District,
maximum.
the Nantucket, and outlying areas. The maximum height. Not talking about the type of fence yet.
No. The height.
Okay.
With acknowledgement that there are exceptions.
Yes. Yeah. There's.
Okay.
Yes.
One guy, okay, if we start into this fence,
one here, or this type there, this type there. If we have one type of board fence, now, is a board fence going to be, this is the thing, the detail someone's going to come up with, and a certain lawyer that busts us all the time, thinks he knows everything. But anyway, the guy comes in, he says, okay, I want a 4-foot board fence.
Okay, I'm gonna.
You want it with 3/4 inch spacing, or you want it tight?
Okay, I'm gonna cut you off right there. We're not gonna talk about the type yet. We're gonna talk about the heights.
Just the height?
We're gonna go through and talk about the heights for the different areas, and then we're gonna come back and talk about. It just makes sense to me. Let's do it the way the guidebook would do it. The guidebook talks about the height for the different area, and then it talks about the style for the different areas. So let's, please, if you don't mind,
Right.
we're talking 4 foot densely would be
Board fence, right.
oldest, not the type, old historic, Sconset, Nantucket, all other areas, no taller than 4 foot.
Okay.
That's the front yard. Do we agree that, and I'm not sure where this is in the record historically, but it was presented to us when we looked at the taller fence on,
Yes, the one that they
Okay.
came in with, Luke.
yes,
Yeah.
okay. So this is an example of the next topic, which is the height of the fence that demarks kind of transition public space, which is your front yard and your side yard to some extent, and your backyard, where you keep your stuff or where you do your stuff.
Right.
This is an example in the historic district of where a 6-foot fence was used
Because that was considered backyard.
because it was considered backyard. And it was their private space, so it prevented people from looking in and seeing
It looks
whatever
like
they
it was
had.
a barn.
Yeah, horse yokes or whatever.
The barn type with his door for the hay upstairs.
Right.
Anyway, if this here was a home, might be enough, might be a home. Right. And now say he's got 30 feet behind him, all right? So we tell him that from the building's right out on the sidewalk out there.
Yeah.
You know, so if it's in front of the Odyssey, a lot of them houses out right out to the sidewalk. There's a sidewalk somewhere. Anyway, if this one here, we say, all right, you can have 4 foot here, you're on the street.
Yep.
But now you're going in your backyard, okay? Now you go in the backyard, you say, okay, you got 20 feet on this side, you got 15 feet on this side, all right? Now, you gotta start where this fence here, 4 foot ends. If you wanna get down the side, you can use a 4 foot board, you can use a 4 foot picket, you know? In the old historic district we're talking about, the 3 of them. All right?
Yep.
That's amicable to me, because he's got all this picket here. Now, he's got, let's see, a house or a barn back there, but he might have land behind it, I don't know. If he
Okay.
does, he's all right. When you get from the fence, the front, when you get to the front property line, and he's right on the property line, that's fine, nothing to do about it. The building will make up for the fence you want. But if his building is 15 feet back, right, up to that front of the house, right here, front of the house, you know, you gotta come out this way. Well, you got 4 foot in the front, right, okay, and he wants to go back this way 60 feet, and then maybe 20
Right.
feet over.
So may I say it a different way?
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying is that 4 feet in the front up to the private space, which typically is going to be, you go across the front yard, you go down the side yard until you hit the front of the house,
right,
and either there on that plane or somewhere behind it on the side yards or in the backyard is the private space. And that's acceptable historically, that's appropriate that the private space would be.
You're
Not talking about the street. I'm not talking about this particular example. I'm just talking about. So I'm just talking about. Here's your street.
right,
Here's your. So that's public space. This is the transition space. That's your front yard. Here's your structure, your dwelling. Pretty much from here, across parallel to the at the front of the house and parallel to it, or at the rear of the house and parallel to it, or somewhere behind it is considered the private space, which would have a higher fence height allowance. Again, not talking about the type of fence, but just the height. The record seems to indicate that's
5 or 6 foot board fence.
5 or
back
6,
there.
right, without getting into the type.
Don't know. I'm gonna go back, you want 4 foot?
I'm
board
gonna
fence?
I'm gonna get to that one next.
Okay.
And that's
You
where
knew where I was going.
Yes, and that's
This
where
is another street.
okay. So Val,
That's what this is an example of.
right, and Val brings up the question of, well, what if it's a private space that's on a street? And I believe that, I think that's the value of the HDC weighing in on those. So this is an example. I hope I remember any of this when we actually talk to the group. The example is when you come in, you get an application. You want to put a 6 foot, let's call it whatever the type is, it doesn't matter. You want to put it to break up the private space at your house, the front of your house, from the transition space to the public. If we have 3 different types of 6 foot fence that are appropriate for different styles of architecture in different areas. So for instance, it might say that a 6 foot board fence is appropriate with these types of structures. Then they put an application in, John would be able to put it under consent.
You're talking about a board, not a 5 and 1.
I'm just saying as an example. I'm not saying this is what we're doing. I'm just using it as an example for the sake of discussion. That would be an example of if it met the guideline, it could be approved under consent. Whereas, and this is where I think the value of having a case-by-case type of approach, or the allowance for a case-by-case approach, is important with the example that Val brought up. In limited situations, you're going to have this situation where you have a private space, clearly private space, no questions asked, and a street. Well, why shouldn't this person be able to have a fence there to protect their private interests? That's where the HTC, it wouldn't go on consent. It would come into the office because it's one of those things that judgment might come into play. And it might be as simple as, yeah, you can have a 6 foot fence, but you can't have it right on the
street,
sidewalk.
right.
You got to have it a foot back so that there's a little bit of landscaping or some transition space. So
Which
people,
I think we did on that.
yes, exactly. So that's what I was thinking would be a good example of an exception. Thank you for pointing that out,
Yeah.
Val. So, okay.
Put that before we make a
Yep.
final decision, right?
Yes. So now that 6 foot is in the same areas, except for, so when I say the same, I'm talking about densely populated, the old historic district, the Sconset historic district. What we've been discussing is a Nantucket historic district. Obviously, of course, subject to whatever rules and regulations they come up with and guides. And all others, no, not all others. 6 foot private areas would be all areas except for where it's not densely populated, right? Because you have a 20,000, or let's again use the zoning examples. You have a 20,000 square foot lot. It's not that you can't have a 6 foot fence on your property. It's that the guidelines say you don't put it around your whole private space.
Right.
Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah. And you think that too. So say you have a 20,000 square foot lot. Not picking on anyone with a 20,000 square foot lot. But the guidelines encourage that if you have a fence, that it undulates with the topography and that it's open and it blends in with the topography.
Yes.
On the other side of that coin, you may have private space that you want to have a 6 foot fence up around. You should be entitled to just as much as the next person to have it for private space. Say you have a pool and you don't want to have a bunch of privet and cypress up, and you want to put up a 6 foot fence in your backyard, and there might be a little bit of it visible. Do you consider that appropriate and acceptable?
Yes.
I'm just using examples, that's
Yeah.
all. Okay. So 6 foot private areas, all above, but not in those open areas. It wouldn't be
There's no,
lot line to lot line.
cannot have a swimming pool in the old historic districts according to town law.
Zoning.
According to the ACC law, if you have one, we always try to either shade it or something like that.
Right.
As best you can. Now, Dr. Walker's house, 5 Fair Street. All right, you go up Fair Street, the first thing there is a little bench park. Then the big house up on top of the hill belongs to the guy that owns the real estate on Main Street, Gary Wynn. Next house is Dr. Walker's on the corner of Grace Court. Both of them wanted swimming pool. I think Wynn put in first, and the other guy said he wanted one. Well, they're small, I know that, compared to what we usually put in 18 by 50. So he had to shade everything he could from Ray's Court, and the other guy had to make sure nothing was seen from Main Street. So this is a situation in the old ACC area. The town says no swimming pool.
Right.
So now, guy got boxed with money, I call it. He's got extra money to play with. He might say, well, I'm going to take him to court.
I don't want to. I get you, but what are we gonna? You know what I mean? We're gonna. Right now, we're pretty busy just trying to pin down what we know, not what could happen. You know what I mean? Because you're leaving in 30 minutes.
I'm more than knowledge for the contractor. I gave up my contractor license 5 years ago. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, if the guy in the old ACC, cool. And then the town bylaw says no, and we say yes, as long as you hide it. They say no, it says no pools, and that's that.
But
So who do you go to? The judges is.
okay,
And
so
I think it's
Yeah.
a zoning
Thank you.
bylaw, and then it can't be challenged.
right. Well, the process would be yes and no. The process would be that somebody wants a variance, then subject to the availability of a variance, because some things you can and you can't get a variance for. Then they have to come in front of the zoning board of appeals, or if they have a special permit, or it says so in the zoning bylaw, they have to go to the planning board.
Right.
So if it's a zoning matter, it doesn't. If it's a zoning bylaw, we don't function under the zoning bylaws. Someone can come in and they can get approved for a skyscraper. John uses this. But if zoning says it can't be built, it can't be built. Now, on the other hand, the other side of it is, if zoning says you can put a skyscraper there, but the HCC says you can't, it also can't get built. So there, the idea isn't though to be kind of separating them and having them be. The idea is to be making these work together more smoothly and more consistency for the general public to be able to understand them and get approvals consistent with what it is Nantucket is all about historically and for HDC under the Act.
And I think the pool thing that we got off on a tangent is not because of what they look like, it was because of the noise involved with the pool.
Right.
In close proximity.
Okay, so fences, back to fences. I want to get into types a little bit because I think we've covered what height you can have. What height is appropriate, where it's appropriate. We need to talk about the type. So, and again, these are this is, I think, to get discussion going there and hopefully wrapped up.
Point of departure.
Yeah. In the, again, just to set the discussion, from the public looking into the transition space, historically, it's either board and batten, which all of them, interestingly enough, do have a cap, I think.
Board
Board and
batten.
batten what?
These are board and batten. I'm not saying that's what we're going, but these are all solid fence.
Michigan?
Yeah, these are all, just tell me when to stop. These are all solid
I don't
fence.
know what you're going, board and batten, that's all.
Well, board, it's a board fence. A board and batten for me would be that it would be like a shiplap vertical with a bat rail across the back side of it.
All right. that's my.
Am I using a terminology different than is normal?
Right. Misconception I've seen in it, you know. A board and bat to me is like you have a house barn. A board, and then you get that 1-inch bat going down each.
Oh, I see. I know what you mean.
That's
Yeah, I'm
board
sorry.
bats and
Yeah,
that's-
you're talking about like a board and batten siding, which is, yeah, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant.
Saying this here, all right, if this is a corner street, you're gonna see the inside of it, in this street.
You're completely right. Board and batten is the incorrect term. I'll blame lines.
Yeah.
So, reset. A board fence is what historically was built in town, or a picket fence. We're talking about town
With a cap.
with a cap. So we're talking about town first. Is that appropriate? Do we believe that that's appropriate to include in a recommendation that you can have a board fence with a cap up to 4 feet tall? This is a guideline, it's not a rule. The other rule, the rule is that the fence needs to be appropriate for the style of architecture. So someone could come in to the HDC with a 4-foot board fence with a cap and say, I want this in my house. I live with the old bricks and I want one of them, and I want to have the 3 bricks, and I want to have this fence. And the HDC would be well within its rights, because of the rule that says it has to be appropriate for the style of architecture, to say, sorry, but no, you can't have it. That's an example. But on the other side, there may be a house where it is appropriate, and there's several of them here. That style of fence, do we agree, should be one of the details of the fences that's acceptable?
Yes.
Up to 4 feet tall. A board with a cap. Okay, so the other one obviously is the type 2.
Picket, yeah.
But there's also plenty that just have the point.
Right.
That point, yeah.
And my grandfather's fence had a low, high, low, high.
Yeah, there's a wide fence.
Yeah.
No, it's not a regular inch and a half.
And I think it'd be beneficial for us to include those as examples of what could be approved. Again, it comes back to, under the rules, is it appropriate for the style of the house? That, the top, the differentiation in the height with a wide slat fence is not necessarily something the HDC has to prove at many homes. But there is that Nantucket typical architecture that it fits in really well
Right.
with. Okay, so that would be, what would we call that fence? I mean, it's a variation. Let's
It's
just
a
say,
board fence, but it has, it's got these things that do this.
right.
Top is like that,
I just get the 45-degree cut.
right,
The
and
other
then,
one, going up to a point, comes right off the side to a point.
right. So his went up and down, and then these,
Yeah, the knee wood, yeah. Right, that's a picket too, yeah.
And so maybe what we could do is
have some pictures.
get some pictures
Yeah.
of what's around. If you're out looking at fences, a great one is drive by. You're going to the steamship, and just before Easy Street Cafe, it's not Easy Street Cafe.
Cantina?
I don't know the name of it. It's a left. I can't remember street names anymore. It's right next to Killen Real Estate.
Yeah,
There's a fence there that's I believe it's a 5, it's a board and lattice, so it's a 5 and 1. I believe it's actually a diagonal lattice. And it comes down and then it transitions into a board fence that's 3 feet tall. And the rail work, it's awesome. They did a great job. They just replaced some of the boards, which makes it jump out of your eye because you see the new cedar. But it's like a great example of something that is a really good solution. That if I just wanted to mention, if we're out and looking at fences, and maybe we all snap some pictures and we bring them in.
that's a good idea.
I know this isn't exactly how I envisioned the process going. I was hoping to be like boom, boom, boom. We're knocking stuff out left and right, but we're getting started. So I think this is important.
Concentrating on it.
Yeah. So so along the line of the variations of picket and board, what I would suggest is that we snap some pictures.
Yeah,
John H., please
Yeah.
partake. and snap some pictures of what we see out there and what we feel is appropriate, and try to get, to the extent you can, get the house in it. Because I think that that's going to be an important part of the overall solution, is what fence is. To me, if I were a user, I would want to pick up the book and not see that I could have, look, we don't want to have an unintended consequence. The unintended consequence is, okay, there's 5 different types of picket or board variation that are approvable. Well, it's going to be more work for us and John, the staff, if we don't kind of say it's approvable for this style of architecture.
Right,
So that's why it's important to maybe snap some pictures of the house style too.
right.
Because we may say this fence, it may be in the book, this fence style is appropriate to Federal, Greek Revival, Pseudo, shingle style. It may say that this type of fence is appropriate in the Sconset Historic District on small cottages. You know what I mean? There's different
Yeah.
ways that we could approach solutions, and I
Yeah.
think it would be
Yeah.
helpful to have an image that shows a structure too.
Gotcha.
Is that good?
Yeah,
Okay, so that's the 4
I
foot.
think that's very good.
If we say Darling Street
Yeah.
has houses and picket, all right, picket fences. If we say you can have a board fence up 4 feet, you know,
Thank you.
on your property, you know, and also, the main important thing in the, I think in the guidebook says that, well, not the guidebook, the judge, anything that,
I'm listening.
you cannot, we may not make a decision whereby something is obviously incongruous to immediate surroundings. So if you got picket fence here, you can't put a board in the middle. It's incongruous.
Well, I think that would be a discussion that the HCC would make and vote, because frankly, I prefer, as a voting member, to have them not all be the same, because I'm not a big fan of the fences in some of the subdivisions that are all the same. I think that if you look at some, I'm not going to name names, but if you compare those subdivisions to subdivisions that they have a different style of fence, to me, you accomplish the goal, which is to create a transition space. You knit the structures together, which is also part of the goal. But by doing it with different fence, I believe that you get a richer sense of character in a neighborhood than just setting the tone that it's all one color, one fence.
Right.
That's my belief. But I think that that's the type of thing that we can be subjective about as to appropriateness or inappropriateness and vote on. And then the end result is that you don't have a homogeneous product at the end. If we say every fence has to be the same, in 50 years, 2050, it's not going to be what it's. I don't think that's going to be what you want, John. Okay.
Take North Shore. They're nice looking homes
Yeah.
for a modernistic style compared to the old, all right? Now, every single fence in front of every single house is 52 or 54 houses in it. It's all the
It's
same.
like 149.
Picket fence, solid white picket fence all the way around. Every single house has a white picket fence, which is fine, you know? So that's harmony, you know, in itself as one development. Now, the guy next door might say, you want board fence?
Yeah.
You want board fences? Give him a board fence?
Okay.
You know, I'm just thinking of an explanation.
Yeah, and then so along your line of an example, to me, in that situation, it wouldn't make much sense to let one person have a board fence, unless there was a broader discussion within and amongst that smaller community saying, hey,
We want
we're
to
going to
mix it up.
Yeah, as we replace these, it's not going to happen today, but as we replace these, we're going to mix them up. Then I would have a different context. But if someone came in and said, hey, I want to replace this with a solid fence, I would be more along the lines of what you're saying, that it should be in context only. But again, those are decisions we can make on a case-by-case basis. And I think that that's where, the way the guideline and the rules are written is going to make a big difference. And we can customize it for this module, if you will. We're doing a fence module. Mm-hmm. We did the mini split module. We're working on the roof shingle module. We're working on the fence module, and then we're gonna look to John too, I think, for some guidance on what might be next, because he's dealing with these applications every day. And one of the things we're looking to do is get some of these maybe smaller, less contentious things out of the way so that we have more time during our actual meetings to talk about recommendations about the bigger, more contentious stuff. So if we're knocking out some of these things and it's easier for us because they're going on consent, we free up more time and we have an opportunity then to be discussing bigger picture stuff. Does
Well,
that
I
work?
think in this discussion also,
Yeah.
we have the opportunity to, and I think we have discussed in the past, different materials, depending where you are.
Okay, so do you think, let me ask you, I know exactly where you're going. So let me ask you this. Do you think we should be talking, I almost believe that, and I'm persuadable, I'm just throwing this out there. You're talking about man-made materials versus
Yeah.
wood.
Uh-huh.
So I almost believe that that should be a separate module.
Okay.
Because I think it's going to get, I think like fences is complicated enough that if we then throw in, I'm not saying we don't address it.
No, we have to address it because,
Yeah.
quite frankly, people are selling it.
I know. And there's some communities that have it up. There's no question that it exists. I'm just suggesting, and I'm looking for your input,
Okay.
that we deal with materials
As a separate
as a module, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Because then we can deal with modules, we can deal with materials for everything. Sidewall, exterior trim, roofing material, gutter, fences,
Gotcha.
even driveway apron and stuff like that. Like we could hit all the different materials as one module. Is that
That's fine.
acceptable to you
I
guys?
just thought of it, so I thought.
I think it's a
could
great
mention
idea.
it.
I'm gonna jot down. We need because that's not one that's in the guidelines separately or as a rule and regulation. It's all kind of underneath each. Then I think the end result, just to be clear, I think the end result of that discussion will be that we plug that information in to each of the other modules, right? So
Yeah.
under fences, there may be something that says in certain areas with examples, it's acceptable to use this type of a man-made material versus wood. This is not acceptable in the old historic district.
Right.
We'll plug those in after the fact to
Yeah.
fences and to gutters and stuff like that. Okay. So we've got the 4 foot. What about the 6 foot? And again, when we say 6 foot, we're not saying only 6 foot. We're saying up to 6 foot. What are you guys thinking about types of fence?
Board.
Type of fence?
Yep.
Well, okay, get down to that new restaurant just opened across from the town building on the corner.
The corner.
Dr. Collins' old house.
Yeah.
Now, they put, of all things, the board fence right out on the sidewalk, 5 and 1, to cover up the rubbish barrel. They had room in the back for them, and I told them at the time, you can put a couple of dumpsters back there and roll them down.
Did they get an agency approval?
They got it, yeah, they got the approval. But, you know, that's what's wrong. It's personal taste. They say you don't have a 4-foot board fence right in front here, that's all you're gonna get.
But I think commercial is a different application.
Right. So there's which we have to do
No
here.
exception for that.
No, I would
That's
rather
right.
see a fence than a dumpster.
Look what they done to all the homes downtown, close to the Jared Kaufman in the quarter mile area. Most everyone is commercial. They rent rooms, they have restaurants.
I think there's a difference, though, John, between what the example Val's making, I think, is if you have a commercial enterprise, if you've got, let's use Cumberland's as an example, because I think it's the clearest one,
Right.
versus an inn.
Right? That's another one.
Cumberland has various things that need to be hidden out of sight for the benefit of the community. There's no benefit going by and looking at stuff there. Nothing against Cumberland Farms.
No.
Love their coffee. I'm
Mine
just
is
saying.
the same thing, Stop and Shop.
Stop and Shop, the same exact thing. So I think that's the example Val's using when she says commercial in one sense. The other sense she's using it is if you have an inn and you have a trash area, it's not like a trash area you or me may have, you or I. It's where you might have a bin and a cover on it or something. You got a lot of trash there. You got a lot of stuff coming in and out. You got different people doing it. You're not bringing out the trash. You might have 3 different employees who take care of it, and they're not maybe as careful as somebody else, like you would be. So you have to have a fence that encloses the area for privacy, which is consistent with the other areas, residential, you're using a taller fence for privacy, but it accomplishes a little bit different goal.
Well, and I think because so many of those old buildings in town are restaurants,
Yep.
restaurant trash is
Yeah.
abhorrent. So I understand why they did that. I wouldn't want to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And 4 feet wouldn't cover it.
Yeah. So back along those lines on type, and John, again, if you here, please just chime in. Types of fence, what would you, here's a great example. Here's Orange Street, a 4 foot with, I would say, at least a 2 foot spindle top, right? Those aren't square.
Right?
In the 1920s, it existed. I personally would never approve that. I just think it's kind of ghastly. But is that a panel opening? Is this architecturally open?
It looks like it.
That's really interesting.
Well, I think
There's a
town
gate
is
on
an
that.
entity in and of itself with fences because those Main Street
While
houses.
you're looking something up, I'll go back. I find it that the last meeting we had with, whatever his name is, okay, that, give him a piece of paper, you know?
I'm listening.
Yeah. And now go back to Cumberland to the 8-foot fence, air conditioner behind it.
Okay, I just want to tell you one thing. We got 10 minutes to come up with a solution here, so you're on a clock.
Okay, all right. Shoot, lost my train of thought.
That's not what my intention was. We're talking about the different types of fences that could be 6 feet tall. Commercial, I think we are case by case. Commercial could be 6 feet or taller. The materials.
Whether it's a board 6 foot or 5'1".
What's the difference?
What do you need all that cross stuff in that 1 foot?
Why do they need it?
Yeah, well, why, it's not to let air in something, that, it should be 6 foot to the top of it.
My understanding is that it's
More friendly
it's an architectural feature. Yeah, it's more friendly.
to the human scale. So it does still block something, but it's not in your face.
And you get a little bit of a view through it.
I mean, look at these on Main Street.
Yeah, right. Oh, no.
You know.
Yeah.
So you get the other, on the other page, when you had a different fence out front, you know?
And how are we going to put those in?
I think in town, it's got to be what's congruent with them.
The architectural style.
Right.
So the 4 foot board with cap type through in the HD. We need to stress that it's appropriate to the style of the architecture, not limited to the above. Subject to
32
appropriateness.
Usually the 36 or 38 pictures,
That's short, yeah.
That's one of the low ones. There's a perfect example right there of the house being back maybe 5 feet from,
Yeah.
from the sidewalk. There was no sidewalk from the
God.
public way. Another thing to look at.
What?
We have a whole. I was so hopeful that we would wrap this up today. We still have to talk about gates. The gates is a whole. I was just thinking we had a gate on Aurora, and that took the better part of, I'd say, 45 minutes, almost an hour over 2 meetings for a gate.
No, that wasn't on Aurora. That was on the way to the jetties.
I thought that's Aurora Way was. It was the gate on the sidewalk between the
Are you talking about
privet.
the thing with they wanted
Yeah.
over where the old tennis courts were?
I don't know. I thought maybe I got the name of the street wrong. But yeah, it was basically
Yeah.
a gate, and it took us. We deliberate. That's what we do. I'm not finding fault with that. I'm just saying part of the fence module is the gates, and we didn't do anything about gate. We haven't talked about gates yet, so I think we're going to have to talk about that. Can I suggest this, because there's a couple of quick things we need to talk about for the next meeting? Is we're talking about the 6 foot board. Are we suggesting are we considering that our recommendation will take the form that is the same type of thing as the 4 foot is that there's the board, there's a board and lattice, which we're calling the 5 and 1. And that there are other types subject to the style of
This
architecture.
I consider a board and lattice. The lattice is different.
Okay. And other types subject to the architecture. And these,
2 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah.
okay,
When's the next meeting?
we're going to talk just 1 minute, because I need to have some. Are there other fence, and then again, on the all other areas, which are the open areas, that's more like it's split rail and open fence. It's not a 6-foot private fence around lot line to lot line of any type.
Right.
So the type in those areas doesn't matter because it's not appropriate. Okay. So John, there's a couple things going on. Our next meeting is Wednesday, the 23rd,
I will be in the
We meet
hospital.
23rd,
and our thoughts and prayers will be
Thank
with
you.
you.
Thank you.
next meeting, 23rd.
Yes, but we need to talk about that. If John, I don't know. I'm hesitant. Okay, let me back up. Brian Pfeiffer was someone who you may be familiar with him. I don't know. He is. He works with a architectural. He's an architectural historian of sorts, and I don't mean like to. He's an architectural historian in the Northeast and in different parts of the world, and he's a preservationist, and he's an active he works as an active contractor preservationist. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And he was going to come in and talk to us about some of his work as relates to kind of who he is, introduction, as a resource for someone who can help us with the historical side, if subject to the whole group accepting it, on the historical side of the rewrite, and perhaps even getting involved in the rewrite of the narrative side of the building with Nantucket in mind.
Okay.
To me, it was kind of important that you be here for this.
And that's when he's coming?
He's coming the 23rd. But wait a minute. The other thing is Holly was going to be coming, and Holly Backus, to do a presentation on keeping history above water, which ties in with the resiliency, not so much the resiliency plan, but it ties in with the most recent issue being structures being built above the floodplain and changing the historic character of the islands in different areas. Those are, just please for 1 minute, those were both scheduled in advance for the 23rd. I hate to put them off, but if you're not going to be here,
I have a suggestion.
we need to have...
Can we ask if maybe another 1 or 2 board members would be present, so there's more ears and...
We can, and that's not a bad idea, but my only concern with that is that what I'm looking for as the guy who's responsible to make sure this happens is continuity amongst ourselves and in recommendations so that we're all on the same page in terms of the information we have. And if you're not here and interacting, and it's not so much that you can listen to it on the video, but I think it's an important opportunity to be getting feedback and asking questions. And I don't want to pass that up. On the other hand, and John, please chime in, I don't want to be putting it off if it means we can't, if it's not going to happen. If we put it off, I would be suggesting we do it for a week, not for 2 or 3 or 5. I mean, I think we can do the modules on a parallel track. This was a little bit of a divergence from that, so we can get another track going.
Right. Well, do what you think is best. If that's the one they can come, then you guys can be here, do it.
All right.
Obviously
You
can't
set them up
change.
every Wednesday in May. You set them up every Wednesday in June. If we meet, okay?
Yeah, I'm doing that. We're just talking about having 2 guest speakers come in because there's other things we need to start dealing with in our modules. One of them is actually the rewrite of the book,
Yeah.
which we can actually take up as a separate kind of a module. But there's somebody who was going to come in and talk about that. And my hope was that Val would be here to ask questions because she's going to be.
But I'm upset about one thing. We gave the map to Matt. He's going to show. He's going to make copies and show it to everybody out there. I guess that's up to him. He said he'd have something for us at the next meeting of how they felt and everything. He doesn't look back. It isn't moving on right now. Until we hear from him what he done with that map.
Yeah, but John, they're going to get a hold of us this week, I thought. Not this week, next Tuesday they were due.
Yeah, we'll see.
Wasn't it?
2 weeks. They were supposed to meet this past week. They didn't have a quorum.
Right, and then they were
working on getting more members for them.
But their input was due not this week, Tuesday, but next week.
Yeah.
So they're still on schedule. So don't be upset.
Can you make it permanent for the month of June, Wednesday and Thursday? One or the other. We don't want to slow down once we get moving here.
Yeah, we're going to meet Wednesday.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean if somebody needs... No,
If they go Thursday,
because the rooms are booked up.
You can always meet at
you know,
12.
this would be
Yeah.
more time to ourselves to get something done.
I can't meet twice a week. In addition,
No, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're saying that if someone can't come on a Wednesday, then we have a notice already for Thursday. More like HTC
gotcha.
does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
We sent the notice anyway.
We can address that.
Yeah.
I'll let you know whether we're meeting Wednesday or not.
Next Wednesday.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
maybe we can do it Thursday. Are you going to be back Thursday or no? You don't know. So maybe we would start that the following week.
And if I am back, I don't know if I'm coming.
Yeah, I know.
We can all three of us can plan our days against
Yeah.
the next month, not every week.
Yeah, believe me, I put in for room reservations already. I've got the month of June booked.
All right, okay. Thank
So
you.
it's more, I get what you're saying. Let's have an option. If we can't meet one day, we can always do a follow-up day.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So I think that's a really good point. It's just a matter of working it out.
The big guidebook, the last one, 1993, was it? That's 180-something pages. That was written in 3 months. No book.
God so loved the world, he didn't invent it by committee.
I wrote most of it. That's why it's a scramble to say. You blame me for John. Thank you.
See you later, John. Thank you very much. John, what do you think about trying to reschedule those guys for the 30th?
I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to Brian about his schedule because he's kind of on a mixed up schedule.
I think
if he can be here a particular day, we could try and schedule to meet with him.
Yeah.
Not next week, but the following week or whatever.
I don't think Val's suggestion would be better than
Yeah.
Even if it's the chairman.
Well, this is the thing. I don't have a problem with us trying to set it up and asking, and I think it's a good idea. My concern is you're not here interacting and getting information that I think is going to be important to our process. And doesn't
I
mean we...
can watch the video. Is there
Right.
a video today?
I don't
Like, do we?
I
don't know if it's on.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned that you're not here interacting and asking
No,
questions.
and I appreciate that. Thank you. I just am thinking if that's the only day.
Because there's only 3 of us here, and I'm not going to say anything else other than that. You know, if we have a guest member from the full, that's great. But there's 3 of us operating, and sometimes it's a challenge with that, the way that it is, and I'm relying on you. So do you know what I mean? Like I kind of need to be able to have you be on the same page in terms of we all have the same information and we.
No, I get it.
So I don't know. I don't want to paint in between any more lines there. I think I believe it would be important for you to be here. I don't want it to be that we're putting this off for any great length of time. I think it's important to get Brian in here. I think it's important to get Holly in here.
Is he on the island?
No, I think he's in Maine.
Oh.
He's his big project now is 86 Main Street.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Brian's been doing a lot of interior structural and stuff. So
It kind of defeats the purpose to introduce him, to have him come in and be introduced.
yeah, I have to check on that.
let's check it. Let's leave it open on it, and we'll check with him and see. I think, just from an operational standpoint, I prefer that you be here and ask questions, and you get to know the person we might be working with for a great deal of time. And since it's, falling on one of my shoulders and one of yours, I'd rather you be involved, if I can say it that way. Is that all right?
Yeah, we can check with them.
Okay. Yeah. No, I get you. You can't make a promise for a guy you don't have his schedule and stuff. Okay.
Save those.
So for the next meeting, we'll talk about when you're present. We'll address gates. I'll try and put this into some type of a format, and then we'll have it in front of us, and we'll address gates. And we might have some stuff from Nantucket Advisory.
Yeah, we'll have to see, because I know Brad, I know filing it for a little bit of time.
I think that's something
Sick, so
to
we're trying to
reckon.
work on getting more numbers for that.
I was gonna
Not
say-
more,
A fuller roster.
but yeah.
More
yeah,
committed.
people are coming back,
A
but,
full roster.
we need to kind of go through all the
Yeah.
terms.
And you're on, I'm presuming, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, but I'm presuming that in terms of how we're operating in our process and our timeline, number one, I would like this to be done in a week. However, we have the resources we have, so we're doing what we can. I do believe breaking these up into modules and getting them out is a good way to go. Are you guys good with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Working all the time.
And then I think that clearly relates to what's happening with the guidebook. There's still things that can be done with the guidebook in terms of a rewrite, in terms of starting to separate information and how it might be structured, the narrative versus the user manual. Because what the modules are doing is they're filling in the details on the user manual, and they might be tweaking some of the details in the narrative. But the broader scope, the rewrite of the guidebook is in a way itself a module, if you know what I mean. We should have discussion about how to do it and who would do it, and then we make a recommendation. And I think that's why we want to have Brian come in, and that's why I think it's important for you to be here. At the same time, once that's up and running, that can be a parallel track with getting the other modules that are going to fit into it, working on those. Does that make...
It does.
And are you guys... I know how I think it should be done. I'm looking for input on how you think. If you think that there is a different way to handle it, that makes the most sense to me given the resources we have.
Well, I think it also helps it not to be so overwhelming.
Right.
Because if you have you at least feel like you're accomplishing something instead of being
Right.
here.
We're chunking it down. And John, I think to me it seemed like it made it more manageable for you to be involved. And I mean, ideally we would be able to do these and meet for an hour and a half.
Right, yep.
Instead of 2-hour meetings. I think that we can get set up and systematized a little bit better. I know there's a lot going on right now. That's not it. It's just we're all understanding how each other work, but I think that we can get to a point where we could be doing some homework on the respective topic and coming in and having discussion. And I'll work with John in advance so that we're a little clearer during the meeting time and staying on topic. Well, I actually can't work with him in advance because 2 of us is a quorum. So I'll work on how to work that out. But ideally, we would meet for an hour and a half and try and bang out a module and or structure it. And then at the next meeting, fine tune it. And at the third meeting, so within a course of a month, we'd have a module out of the way. And starting on another one. And if the guided book is one that's up and running as a separate module, maybe that's where we spend 15 or 20 minutes or half an hour. Maybe it is a 2-hour meeting. And we talk about that so that's running a parallel track. And this whole thing comes together. Because I don't think we have that many modules. I think we can group things.
I think you could do all right, yeah. Some modifications, just a few of the things.
Yeah, some of them are going to be like although they're very different topics, they're so small that we can group them together.
Yeah.
And then others are so related that we can group those together.
Mhm.
And I mean, we're well on our way with 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
We've just got gates to do here.
Can I leave you with some food for thought?
Yeah, please.
One of them was corner lots.
Okay,
So
yep.
just like we did Pine
Mhm.
Street, house on the corner of Main,
Mhm.
86 Main Street. On Pine Street's the side is the corner. and it's the
Well,
back.
that's what I was using as,
And is that allowed to have a 5-foot?
that's what we were just talking about.
My suggestion, I think that it's a good point, it's a good question, and I think that we should highlight it in our recommendations as an example of where it's a good, where this is, that this is one that would not come in and be a consent item.
Right.
Whereas if you have a house that is in between 2 homes, as a counterexample, and, well, I mean,
Yeah.
the simple ones are the simple ones. This is one that needs feedback from the membership to determine
Mhm.
what type of fence is acceptable, whether it can go right on the property line on the sidewalk, or needs to be a foot back, or 2 feet back, or whatever. So corner lots, what's the other one?
Small lots versus large lots.
Okay, yep, and
Well, we kind of, both of these we kind of talked about a little bit.
yep. I think it doesn't hurt, I get your perspective. I think it doesn't hurt to point out the difference,
Yeah.
because people are going to think about things differently.
Yeah, yeah.
So if we're talking about density,
In other
Could be
words,
different
I
things.
would have an example, like if this was a
right.
giant lot,
Yep.
100 feet by 200 feet, this would be unacceptable with
Yeah.
a fence. But if your house is here and you want to have that,
Yes.
then it's yeah.
And I think this is where we're going with these is
Examples?
examples to illustrate the point first to the membership,
Mm-hmm.
the commission, and then have those be fine-tuned. I think that it's good to have the consistent. There's going to be some things that this lends itself to. Clearly, details of illustrations of fence types is a little different, but that's where drawings and pictures are going to be integral to being successful. Having schematic, a site plan type example, or actually various examples, I think is also going to be very helpful. But then those are actually going to be able to translate, I think, to the final product, building with Nantucket in mind. So not only will fences and gates plug in as a module in terms of text and locations, but with respect to illustration type examples. The artistry and all the rest of that stuff, I'm going to leave up to someone else. I have a ton of interest in it, but we have no time for that. That, I think, is something that we could be relying on.
I think the person who puts the book together.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
And maybe that's,
And it
we
could-
just brought up Gnaw Shop. So Gnaw Shop, my parents live in there, and I don't think there's not one, not that I know of, I'll probably drive on. But all the houses are separated by hedges,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think there's 6-foot fences that run along the houses.
Now,
Okay.
yep.
Sagem's Path, we're seeing the opposite.
Well,
all
and-
those, and those are tightly packed together. There's probably a little more open space in Sagem's Path, but those are pretty close together, and we're seeing a lot of applications for fences.
Well, and I think
there, so.
the difference is, and this is what I've been trying to point out, I think on the front end, when a development is coming in, some of that stuff should be sussed out on the front end. It seems to me they probably planned how the overall look was going to be in Nashawquisset, whereas Sachem's didn't.
No.
But also, I looked up online when that all came in, what it looked like, and
Yeah.
it looked
Yeah.
like there was going to be trees,
Yeah.
and there was going to be,
Okay, I'm going to broaden that, if I may.
Yeah.
And this isn't a qualitative or it's quantitative with respect only to the final product when the developer leaves the site. And what I mean by that is, if you look at, for instance, Beach Plum, which is a mixed 40B. I'm using the 40B as an example because it's the most relevant. You have a development where the developer is putting in marketable properties above and beyond what the 40Bs are. It's not handling the 40Bs any different than the market rates, but there's a higher level of incentive. This is just the reality of it. I mean, I've managed these properties, I've designed landscape for these properties, I've designed structures for these properties. The landscaping is built into the design with something that is not necessarily strictly a 40B. And I'm not saying that with the 40B at Sachem's Pass they didn't build it in. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just saying there's a different level of incentive. A developer is not going to put in a 4-inch caliper tree in the front yard, the backyard, the side yard, and 6 or 8 foot privet in a strictly 40B. It's just not going to happen. The funding is not there. It's just not. It's a reality of the monetary thing.
I think it could be planned on the front.
Well, wait. I'm not suggesting it can't be. I'm just saying that the reality is that one of them takes care of itself, like Nashawquisset, Naushop, Beach Plum, whereas if you have a development where that isn't part of the incentive package for a buyer, this is an incentive package for a buyer. These other subdivisions, the buyer, they needed to entice the buyer to come and buy the house. The Sachems look more like the pictures we just looked at from 1880s and 1820s. There's no landscaping in those houses. They put these big board fences in because that was what they needed. I'm not saying it shouldn't be planned. I've actually brought that up to different people about how processes work to see if maybe I could garner some support on that. I think I have. But as relates to what we're doing, I think corner lots, small lots, along with density, subdivisions is an area where I don't know how we do it, but that is along the lines of Naushop, and you have to, I think it's, look, the HCC has to make a decision based upon the individual application, but it doesn't, there's nothing that precludes the HDC from trying to open a dialogue with, for instance, Sachem's Pass Homeowners Association, which we've discussed. We haven't done it yet, but if we were to open up a dialogue with them, so we understand the context, and we can ask them maybe to plan some in advance. Falling short of that, I think where we end up is we fall back on, you can have a fence of, on a lot that is on a smaller lot versus a larger lot, so let's say a 5,000 square foot versus a 10,000 square foot. You can have fence such that it can be unbroken for 40 feet. And then you have to have some type of a landscape element on a smaller lot. Whereas on a larger lot, say 10,000 square feet, I'm not suggesting this be the rule, I'm just using an example. On a 10,000 square foot, it might be 72 feet length of fence without having an unbroken, which is to say having landscape elements. So that what the approval does is it accomplishes what you're talking about in terms of the end result being aesthetically pleasing and not just a bunch of urbanization fences everywhere. Down this line, across this line, down that line, everything is partitioned off. There's no softening effect. My only point, maybe I didn't say it very well, is that that happens on the front end in a for-profit development to some extent. And even if it doesn't happen on the front end, it happens in the process because the developer needs to entice buyers to buy, so they're putting in that type of an attractive element. Sachem's a little bit different, where the owners are kind of left to determine what it is they would like to do on their own and then put it in. Where in a different type of a subdivision, you buy it turnkey. You're not coming in and doing your own fences, typically. It's there. Like you go in and you talk to the developer and say, yes, we'd like this style of home. You know, you've got a model of 6 different types of homes. We'd like it sited here. Let's discuss the landscape plan. And then the developer will say, well, we typically use, privet or cypress. Sometimes we don't use cypress if certain characteristics are desired or it's too close together between 2 homes. Or we'll use fence in certain situations where the proximity dictates it. And then they kind of work that out and then they buy their package. Now some developers won't even do that. They'll just landscape it and then they'll sell it on spec. So maybe too much information, I apologize, but I think that we can address the subdivisions in our recommendation for guidelines by requiring a limit a maximum length of unobstructed, unbroken fence.
Maybe it will be a percentage or something, because the
Right.
rules are all different.
Right.
30%, 50.
Right, something like
30%.
Does that make sense to you
Yeah,
guys too? Or,
yeah.
I mean, I'm throwing it out there, I'm looking for feedback.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it
tough, but I
does.
think subdivisions are definitely something that's different.
Yeah.
And whether, another part of it is sighting, whether it's the back corner of the house.
Yep.
And they can have 6 foot starting at the back corner. Starting at house, front corner.
Yep.
We don't allow them down the street, and that's, I don't know where there is one that goes down the street.
Well, that's just a safety thing too. If you're pulling out of your driveway.
Yeah, and I think where we came out on that in our discussion, I know you were busy doing other work, is that it would be basically, there's 3 areas in any home that we're looking to fence, we being, the community. You've got the public, under the guidebook, you've got the public street where you put a fence. Then you have the transition space, which is your own private space, but it's open to view from the public, and then the private space. And some of those are complicated by corner lots, smaller lots, general density and proximity, and whether you're in a subdivision and whether there's a context issue to address or not, based on the maturity of what's around you, which Satcham's is a great example of a lack of maturity of landscaping making the fences an issue. Whereas if they had more mature landscaping over time, it would be a different discussion.
Yeah, I think I'm just afraid, and you're right, it's new, that fences will just be
Right.
what separates them, and there won't be any landscaping, really.
And I think you're right that it's an important aesthetic to be reviewing. And I think we're going to get there. It's just a matter of, getting, I think it's important to have this part, this is like the foundation for those decisions. Because otherwise we're having decisions about items we haven't all agreed are what's the most appropriate solution. So instead we're kind of feeling it out in the dark in a way, not really a great analogy, but you know what I mean. Okay, so the next meeting we have that we meet and discuss topics will be about wrapping up fences. I believe we'll talk about roof shingles and fences and gates and roof shingles, and the next module, which I'm not quite sure, but let's think about what we think is most appropriate. And John, this is important for you to give us feedback on, because again, if there's, what we're trying to do is break it out of the rules and regulations appendix G and group them by like kind. But if there's something else, or if there's something in there, or there's something else that's pressing, let's address it first.
I think
because
solar,
yeah, actually solar.
I think
alternative
Yeah.
energy, actually.
in the act, the guidelines, the policies, handling of applications, which is in the legislation. Apparently there's no.
Oh, I was going to send you the one from this.
Recorded with the county clerk.
Okay, so just so you're aware, the 1968 guidebook, or 69, whatever it is, has that.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting we rely on it,
Okay.
but it's actually published. I don't know if it was ever entered with the town clerk,
Okay.
but so you're aware it's in there, and that if push came to shove, the agency does have it.
Okay.
And I think it even says policies and procedures.
Okay.
But that's a good one for us to be talking about. And you did a draft,
Right.
so it's just a matter of reviewing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great example of where we might just sandwich stuff into a meeting and be able to get it knocked out in a meeting or two in the form of a recommendation to the full commission. But let me put that on the list, which is policies and procedures. Okay, great. And so we're scheduled for the 23rd at Wednesday the 23rd. I believe it's 1 p.m., but I'm not going to set that in stone on the tape. It is on the town's calendar, and we'll discuss whether we can get Brian to reschedule,
Okay.
and Holly. Okay. So motion to adjourn. So moved. All in favor?
Motion to adjourn. Thank you.
That seemed kind of productive.
In spite of it all.
Yeah.